Why Leader in Me? Leader in Me isn't as much about doing things differently as it is first seeing them differently. When one principal reimagined what school could be for her students, her teachers, families, for her community, who would have thought that vision would see over 5,000 schools around the world, transforming how they proactively create the learning culture they want to see in their buildings. And you're invited to join this community of seeing the power of leadership as a choice rather than a position, of taking the talk of whole child learning into whole person teaching practice, and getting hands-on with real social emotional learning at school and at home, helping others see what they don't yet see in themselves. That's the adventure and the promise of Leader in Me.
Thank you to Leader in Me. At this point, I'll ask you all to remain in mute mode as I turn it over to Karen Bronson, SAANYS Director of Professional Learning, to get us started.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Annika. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. We're very excited about the third part of our three-part series, Rebuilding Calls for New Tools. Some of you may have been with us for the first two parts that featured other authors who really spoke to some of the very important ideas and themes that we're very focused on today. And especially going into this next school year, which may not be exactly like the last school year, certainly not like the one before it. So we're all going to wait and see what this school year is going to be like. But what we do know is, first of all, the more we stick together, the better chance we have of navigating any unknown landscapes, but also bringing in the best possible resources, expertise, and collaboration to the complex work that and ever-changing work we're doing right now is really key. So for that reason, I am absolutely so grateful and happy that we have fostered a wonderful collaboration with New York State ASCD. Welcome, Eric Larison. And Matt Youngins is our other partner and collaborator with New York ASCD. He's not with us today, but he will be there watching. And Eric, I am so happy that we were able to bring Nancy into this wonderful series. As I have said to Nancy in our conversations, I have been one of her biggest fans for years. You know, when I was a school leader, I always looked to Nancy and Doug Fisher and others and the books for real clarification on complex work, and not only clarification, but the kinds of innovative ideas that we all need to be really kind of thinking and considering now. So we are very, very grateful to be here where we are today with all of you and with Nancy. I am also extremely grateful for my colleague, Dr. Bonnie Tryon. Bonnie is our SAANYS mentor coordinator. And once again, we know that the more challenging and complex our landscape becomes, the less any of us wants to do it alone. So Bonnie's going to tell us a little bit more about another way that we at SAANYS are very happy to support you. Might be something you want to get a little more information on, and Bonnie will tell you how. Good morning, Bonnie.
Hi, Karen, and thank you, Annika, and our ASCD compatriots in this work. It's a pleasure to be with you. And if you're trying to take this whole body of work that you've been learning about in this series and will engage in today, and you need a thought partner, then that's where our SAANYS mentor coaches come in. We have a traditional one-to-one, one mentee to one mentor coached model. We also have a really cool, it's really great. It's a small group option where 4 to 6 administrators, it could be several of you from this very group from the same district, from different districts get together, and a trained mentor coach works with that group over the course of 10 months to actually put into practice what you hear about today. We're the only statewide mentor coaching program that exists. And we've been doing this for over a decade. So we've got some experience behind us. I'm going to put my email in the chat. I know some of you have already contacted me wanting more information. Be glad to send you our brochure and even speak to you one-to-one so we can customize something for you, for your district, and even for your neighbors. And even if you don't use our SAANYS mentor coaches, get somebody that you can talk to, that you can share your ideas in a thoughtful, confidential manner, because life's too complex to go without it. So thanks, Karen. Back to you.
Thank you, Bonnie. So everyone should have received materials from Nancy along with the link. And I will just remind everyone that everyone who registered for this series will receive the link with the recorded version of this session. This session is being recorded, so please be aware of that. It takes a couple of days for us to edit the recording, but trust me when I say everyone registered will receive the recording, and that recording will be live and usable for 60 days after you receive it. So just one more reminder, we really want as much interaction and involvement from you, our attendees, as we can get. So Nancy will be inviting you to post in the chat. She'll take questions. She'll explain that to you, but the more the better. So with that, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to my colleague from New York State ASCD, Eric Larison. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning. Thank you, Karen. We too are very excited about this series that developed over the last 3 months with SAANYS. Both of us have professional learning for all educators in our DNA. And so we look forward to many future partnerships as well. Many of you know of Nancy through her books, but a little bit about her background helps to understand where she comes from. She is the professor of educational leadership at the San Diego State University, where she focuses on policies and practices in literacy and school leadership. In 2007, along with her colleagues Doug Fisher and Ian Pumpian, she founded Health Sciences High and Middle College, an award-winning open enrollment public school in the City Heights district or neighborhood of San Diego, California. She serves there both as teacher leader and as the Dean of Academic Affairs, continuing to learn every day from students and teachers and families. She is the recipient of the Krista McAuliffe Award for Excellence in Teacher Education from the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, and the Early Career Award from the Literacy Association or Research Association. She has published many articles and books on literacy, instructional design, curriculum development, professional learning, and school leadership, including the book today's session is based on, as well as a recent book from ASCD titled Student Learning Communities, a Springboard for Academic and Social Emotional Development. Again, both those books are by ASCD. So now I turn it over to a great friend, not only of New York State ASCD, but also of educators across New York State, Nancy Fry.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for that warm welcome. And Karen, thank you so much for the opportunity. As Eric noted, my colleagues, Ian Pumpian and Doug Fisher and I founded a high school a number of years ago, 15 years ago now. It's hard to believe that it has been that much time. And we are a fully inclusive high school. So as I talk about some of our processes and procedures and so on today, please know that those are actually implemented by us. They're not just theoretical constructs. Hey, this would be a great thing to be able to do. But so often we were asked to really be able to talk about what it is that we do at our school to make that possibility. And so we partnered, Doug Fisher and I partnered with Julie Kroner, who's our Director of Special Education, as well as Leanne Jung, who is noted all across the world for her work in inclusive education. And that's how this particular book and body of work came into being as well. But I'd love to be able to hear from all of you about what brings you here today in particular. And so we're going to go ahead and launch a poll, and that is what best describes your primary professional role? And thank you so much for those of you that are answering. I'm seeing the results that are in there. We're going to end the poll in just a couple of seconds. I'm seeing lots of principals that are here, special education coordinators, general educator, welcome. Go ahead and get your answers in there. And I love that we're getting a real mix of who's in our session today, because you know what, that really is at the heart of what it is that we're able to accomplish as a team. I suppose as much as anything that I hope that you take away this idea, and that is that they're not your students or my students in particular, but rather they really are all of our students. And it takes all of us together in a collaborative kind of way in order to be able to make those possibilities for students with and without disabilities to be able to realize what those are. As I said, the body of work that this is based on is from ASCD, your students, my students, our students, and some of the materials, the handouts that I offered for today actually come directly from the book. You know, Leanne is such an inspiration to all of us. We really enjoyed being able to partner with her. And she always brings and starts her sessions with this particular quote from Michelangelo, that the greatest danger for most of us is not that we aim too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it. And that certainly can be the case with students with disabilities. I'd like to start off with just comparing and contrasting two young adults that I worked with beginning in the 1990s. I'll introduce you first of all to Chris. Chris is the woman in the wheelchair. Chris was placed into a segregated setting, a live-in facility when she was a child, when she was 8 years old, and grew as an adult at that place. The Home for Guiding Hands was the name of it. She grew into young adulthood. Chris didn't have much in the way of volitional movement. She had some volitional movement, but she didn't have spoken language. And it took a nurse one day who recognized that there were things that Chris could actually do. And so she introduced Chris to what at the time was just a letter board, just a piece of cardboard with letters on it. And before long, Chris was spelling out consistently, "I want to leave, I want to leave." Over time, and with partnership with our university project, we were able to build a circle of support around Chris. Mickey, who is the woman to the left of Chris, was one of those supports. What we were able to do was to be able to find a place for her in the community. We arranged for housemates to be able to work with her. Mickey at the time was her housemate. We did a lot of training with Mickey about Chris's care and those sorts of things, and she was paid in order to be that housemate. Chris got a job at the San Diego Police Department doing data entry, and while she is slow in being able to do that data entry, she is very accurate and therefore is very much valued. It took a lot of money and a lot of resources to move Chris into the community because she didn't have that circle around her. Now I'll contrast her with Adam. Adam is the young man on the left. Adam went to an inclusive high school, had experiences all through his high school years, had a circle of friends that were around him. And as he and his friends approached that graduation date, his school, along with support from us, assisted in being able to have a person-centered planning meeting about where Chris wanted to be going forward in particular. Chris's friends, many of whom were going to be attending San Diego State University, noted that they regarded him as a friend and that they wanted to maintain their relationship with him. For Adam, I'll note that he has very little language. He requires supervision for 23 hours a day, and he doesn't like steps. That's important. He doesn't like steps. And so we found a place for him down in PB in Pacific Beach. If you know our area, it's very flat down there, so he didn't have to walk any steps. And those friends lived with him all through college and rotated their supports for him as well. Chris, with their help, started a business, and he has a machine and cleans parking lots in the evenings after business hours with that machine. He also has a cleaning contract at the Gold's Gym that is down there as well. One of the roommates would bring him when he was working out, because as I said, Chris needs, Adam needs supervision during that time. So he'd bring him to the workouts. And as you can see, Adam really doesn't like to work out a whole lot, but he does like to put things away. And what the gym owner noted was that Adam was really good at being able to do those sorts of things. And so he hired him to be able to do that. Adam's support didn't require a lot of money in order to be able to do so, because he had that social support around him. It did require coordination, but not a lot of extra cost to go along with it. The fact is that when you have an inclusive early life, it predicts an inclusive adulthood. When you have a segregated early life, it predicts a segregated adulthood. In fact, the evidence is for students in segregated settings for a variety of disabilities, that their likely adult outcomes include one of two segregated settings, either in a group home or in prison. Those are the stark realities that go along with that. Now let's do another poll, because I know what my why is. My why is really around my kind of an equity focus, making sure that we're achieving all of the things that we can possibly do. But I'd like to know from you, what are in particular, what brings you to inclusive education? What are some of those things that are really important for you to be able to do? What draws you here? Go ahead and drop that into the chat. What brings you here? What is it that for you really drives your inclusion focus? Oh, and Becky, thanks for getting us started off there. Yeah, exactly. A high tide lifts all the boats, right? Yeah, and Samantha, absolutely. Improving outcomes for our students with disabilities. Adam, I love your phrase too about ensuring that all students have access, because this effort really is about all students. It's not only about students with paperwork, it's also for all those students without paperwork as well. Being able to embrace who it is that you are, equity, access, inclusion. I love those notes that all of you are bringing as well. Yeah, and Mary, I couldn't agree more. Making sure that those possibilities are evident for students, making sure that they have those chances to be able to achieve what it is that they want to be able to achieve. And Heather, I so appreciate your comment as well about it's not one size fits all. You know, it's really interesting to me that in so many schools, we still maintain these segregated settings. The world is not segregated in that way. There isn't a special education McDonald's, for example, that you go to. Being able to understand that we're all a part of a community is essential. And we want to make sure that young people in particular learn that right from the very beginning. We believe strongly that there should be no places in our building where only students with IEPs are being served. That it can communicate to students that this is the way that the world should be. And it requires a number of disruptions, in fact, 5 disruptions that I'll offer to really be able to reconceive, rethink what it is that schools can look like. Here we are after this unprecedented experience that we've had over the last 18 months. What an opportunity that we have for us to really be able to reconceive, rethink, reimagine what it is that schools are. And those 5 essential disruptions include making sure forwarding a culture of equity and education, reconceiving structures that honor the spirit of least restrictive environment, ensuring that collaborative instruction and intervention is in place for all students, considering students' aspirations and foregrounding those aspirations as a part of our planning, and especially in ensuring that all educators support all students. So let's talk about that first disruption, a culture of equity and inclusion. So what does it mean when we're talking about equity? Well, certainly here's a definition that an equitable lens recognizes that every student comes to school with a unique profile of identities. That certainly is a stepping off point, but it takes much more than simply recognition. Equity occurs as a result of sensitive, courageous, and creative conversations and actions. And equity requires the distribution and the redistribution of resources and initiatives that are based on individual and group needs. And that the determination of those, it comes from multiple sources of qualitative and quantitative data. I have to tell you, and I'm sure you've had this experience as well, that so often I am approached by a school and they say, we want to make sure that we are targeting our special education students, or as Robert noted, we need to be able to do something about our English learners because the test scores came in and they're not performing at those expected levels. Well, those test scores only tell us a little bit about what's going on. They tell us where to look, but we have to go deeper into the qualitative aspects of that as well. What's happening in those classrooms? What are students accessing or not accessing? And it's important that we understand that we have a vision for what it is that equity actually looks like. What are our outcomes? A measure of equity is in making sure that we have engaged, inspired, and successful learners. All students engaged, inspired, and successful. And that means that we need to look closely at our student body, because our job is to facilitate the development of a student body that is engaged, inspired, and successful. I think it's easy for any of us to be able to point to specific students and say, that student is engaged, that student is inspired, that student is successful. But what does it mean to have a student body that is engaged, inspired, and successful? Not just individual students. That's what drives us in always looking for how it is that we can continue to improve. And part of that is in dismantling what seems to be this false dichotomy of disability. Either you have a disability or you don't have a disability, right? That there's this bright line, general education and special education, that has led to this extreme dichotomy. And it's confusing for new teachers in particular. New teachers report being the least prepared in the areas of differentiation, assessment, and in supporting behaviors. They come into a system that already is set up to say there's one group and then there's another group, and somehow you need to traverse both of those groups, but we don't really give them a lot of tools to be able to do so. The evidence is pretty clear that general educators as a group often feel less equipped to be able to support students with disabilities. And that's on all of us collectively. We need to make sure that those resources are there, and we need to make sure that our structures that are in place are not, in fact, reinforcing that approach, that divided approach. There's a major understanding about disability. For example, not understanding that, that among all students, there's a range of abilities that they have. And we'll take IQ tests, which are often a measure of how it is that we identify students with intellectual disabilities in particular. That number alone doesn't tell you much about a student, either with or without a disability, in terms of what their strengths are, in terms of what their opportunities for growth are as well. We need to look beyond the quantitative data to be able to look closely at what it is that our students bring forward. And it's important as well to note that there are origins of learning differences that come from a variety of places, some of which are neurologically based, some of which are environmentally based. We want to make sure, to the best of our ability, that as school leaders, that we are not creating environmental qualities that help to reinforce what those learning differences are. In other words, noting that kids with IEPs don't have special needs. They do have special rights that we need to pay attention to, of course. But we want to make sure that we're not setting up environments that reinforce disability. Now, what does that look like? That looks like practices that happen at the classroom level. I'll provide a couple of examples. We know from John Hattie's work in visible learning that teacher expectations have a great deal to do with what it is that students achieve. 0.40 is the average of all of those influences, those 300 some influences that he's identified. No surprise that teacher expectations fall right along there, because you know what? The expectations that we have for students are incredibly accurate at being able to predict what it is that that student will actually be able to do. And that's where that deficit thinking comes into play. In particular, we know that deficit thinking is harmful for students, and the explanations and the justifications that we utilize can have effects on students. So how do we talk about students? And as I said, this idea of disability, this idea of lowered expectations, it happens in our conversations that we have about students. Really interesting study that was done just recently, just within the last year or two. And what these researchers looked at were the conversations that happened in professional learning communities, in teams in grades 3 through 5 at a number of different schools around the country. And these researchers tracked these PLC conversations for a year to be able to especially note how it was that teachers explained low test scores among their students. And these low test scores were sometimes those standards-based tests, but more often teacher-based tests, as well as district benchmarks and those sorts of things. And they brilliantly titled their study, "How did that happen?" Right? And as I said, they tracked the conversations of teachers in PLCs every time they looked at data to find out what it was that they actually talked about. Here's what they found out. 85% of the time, the explanations that were offered had to do with student characteristics, where teachers attributed students' low test scores to things like behavior. Well, you know, he doesn't pay attention. That's why he had difficulty with this. Or a mismatch between the assessment itself and the student. You know, he's an English language learner. That test really doesn't support English learners in particular. That's the problem. Or the student's home life. You know, they never read to her at home. And suspected or underlying conditions, often speculative. For example, I think she's dyslexic. Only 15% of the time were students' low test scores attributed to teaching, attributed to instruction. 85% of the time, it was about the students' characteristics. The way that we talk about students leads to labeling. And labeling, we know, is incredibly damaging. Those conversations that we have with others, where we start to describe students in terms of a deficit, in terms of what it is that they can't do. They're struggling, they're a slow learner, they're a behavior problem. They're lazy, they're stubborn. A more recent one, the COVIDians, right? We've got a whole pack of students who are coming our way who have had some interrupted learning that's going on. How are we going to talk about those students? The labels that teachers, that educators give to students has a predictive quality. Going back to the visible learning database, not labeling learners has a tremendous accelerant for students. I am not talking about identifying students who need supports, but rather not allowing that identification to become the prediction for that child's future. That child has a specific learning disability. That what comes with that are some specialized supports that are there, but it is not predictive of what it is that that child is able to do. We also label students in our own classrooms, sometimes through public humiliation. How often in elementary classrooms do we see clip charts? Everywhere. Clip charts everywhere as a way of being able to manage behavior. That's the way that they are sold. This is a way to be able to manage behavior. So we see all these clip charts. And by the way, very often we see clip charts where kids' clips are just sort of permanent in a particular area. In practice, they actually don't end up getting utilized in the same way other than for punitive purposes. Look at the language on this one. I am not here to learn. I am not respectful, responsible, safe, or kind. I am off task and I did not complete my work. I am not participating. Don't let the friendly font fool you. That is a cruel way to talk about a child, a cruel way. And it labels that child not only for herself, but also for all of her classmates. For any of you that own your own personal child, perhaps you can relate to this. How often did you know the names of some students in your child's class? Not because you had ever met them, but because your child talked about them and talked about them in negative ways. Ronald had a stormy day again today. You don't even know who Ronald is. but you know he has a stormy day all the time. Another set of researchers looked and surveyed parents in K-5 classrooms, parents whose children attended behavior controlling classrooms. Now, not all classrooms, of course, run on behavior control, like clip charts and table points and token economies. But what it was that they surveyed were families that had children in behavior controlling classrooms. And what those parents reported is that over the course of the year, their children experienced higher levels of anxiety. They fixated on the behavior system, and over the course of the year, they grew to dislike school. Now, 73% of the parents' comments were negative, and it was regardless of whether their child was rewarded frequently or infrequently. Importantly, too, those parents reported that their relationship with their child's school also declined over the course of the year. This isn't what it is that we're going for as school leaders, not when we're trying to build relationships with families, not when we're trying to help children and be able to understand what their possibilities are. Can we please unclip our classrooms? Can we start with co-constructing what our classroom promises are and be able to have conversations with individual students when they're having difficulty that are humane and that are growth producing, and not a matter of public humiliation? Now, I'd like to turn this over to you in the chat box. What are some things that you keep in mind as you discuss students with behavioral disabilities? Whether you are a principal and you have some students in your school who have behavioral disabilities, whether you are a teacher who has a student with a behavioral disability, what are some of the things that you keep in mind in order to be able to have those humane and growth producing kinds of conversations with families, with other teachers, with students? Oh, I love that, Samantha. You're right. Behavior is a function of need. Absolutely. All behavior has communicative intent. We have to find out what those are. And Maxine, thank you so much for that reminder as well. All parents have hopes and dreams for their children. We do not have the right to be able to dash those dreams. Our job is, to the best of our ability, to be able to nurture what those dreams are. And Peggy, thank you so much about just reminding ourselves, even just speaking to ourselves, how would I want my child to be treated? How would I want a child in my extended family to be treated? And Becky, thank you for that reminder as well. I have often said in the course of conversations when a teacher is struggling with a child, just a reminder that that kid did not wake up and say, in particular, I think I'm going to ruin her day today. And Karen, I appreciate your question so much as well. How do you dislodge those kinds of practices? And I think it's helpful to be able to have that conversation because, as I noted earlier, equity means that we have to have those conversations that sometimes are a little bit uncomfortable, but we have to be able to be brave enough to be able to say that. If you've got a colleague who's still relying on a clip chart, don't go in there and shake your finger at her and say, hey, I went to a webinar and the person said don't use clip charts, but instead ask her about that. What are some things that she feels that clip chart does for her? And what are some things that she feels that clip chart gets in the way of, to be able to open up that conversation and then listen. listen to that conversation and introduce other ideas about that. I have to tell you that clip charts are often preached about in teacher school as a way of being able to do some classroom management, right? Or we're doing table points, or we're doing hash marks on the board and those kinds of things. We're better than that. We're better than that because we know that relationships are the foundation of everything it is that we do. We build on those relationships. So that disruption, it requires having some of those conversations and listening to others. Let's look at a second disruption, which is upending that damaging divide in school structures. You know, so often I hear this language, my kids, your kids. I was an inclusion support teacher in an middle school and also in an elementary school. And I can tell you that this language permeated our conversations about when, quote unquote, my kids were going to be coming into the class, and what it was that I was going to do to be able to support those children. There wasn't this perspective that they are our kids, that as adults, we collaborate with one another, but that the students are our kids. When I worked in Florida, one of the things that we had to do at the district level was to change the rosters so that students with disabilities showed up on the roster of general education teachers. The funding formula that they were using at the time in the district that I worked in required that I, as a special educator, had students who were on my roster, and then the general educators had other students on theirs. So we really had to be able to change what those structures looked like in order to be able to make sure that funding happened, but that the students appeared on the rosters and they really are our students. When we have segregated work structures, we teach children that that's the world that they should expect to see, and that that's the way that it should be. And very often we talk about LRE, the least restrictive environment, as being aware, and we limit what it is that we're looking for in terms of where. If you look closely at the work around least restrictive environments, it's really around least restrictive supports. Least restrictive supports are what it is that we should be articulating. And those least restrictive supports include things like direct delivery of instruction to be able to support a class, co-teaching to support a student, co-teaching to teach an adult, consultation services, coaching services, and so on. I think one of the struggles that I had earlier in my career working at a large high school here in San Diego is that there was an initiative to be able to create co-teaching, but at least in the first couple of years, co-teaching was not seen as capacity building for the adult. In other words, it was only focused on students, and there wasn't really any emphasis at all on how it was that we could build the capacity of the general education teacher as well. In other words, the work was still divided. We were often in the same classroom together, but the work itself was divided. coming in and doing some of that co-teaching to teach the adult, doing some of that co-teaching that consultation model in particular helps to be able to grow the capacity of the school over time to be able to support students. The evidence from the Office for Civil Rights suggests that the main predictor of whether a child in the United States is in a restricted setting or in an inclusive setting has to do with geography. It doesn't have to do with that student's identifying disability. It's geography. In other words, it's the capacity of the system to be able to support students or not. We've had a fully inclusive high school for 15 years. My kids are not different from your kids. The only thing that's different is around capacity. What's the capacity of the system to be able to do so? And there needs to be an orientation that we are building each other's skills as adults, not only supporting students. That least restrictive support extends to adults as well as to children. The frequency and the intensity are often determined as much by what the adult needs as what the students need. And that sometimes can be a double-edged sword. That a particular teacher needs more support because that teacher says, I don't know how, I don't know how to do this. I didn't go to school in order to be able to support students with blank disability, right? Well, I'm here to tell you, specialists don't have magic hands. We don't have magic fairy dust that we can sprinkle on kids and make the disability go away. In fact, that's not our intention. Our intention, our orientation is not in making a disability go away, in making it vanish. But sometimes I think there's a naive assumption that that's what it is that segregated special education environments offer, is that somehow we fix kids. Our orientation is especially on being able to find other ways in order to accomplish what it is that's needed. Specialists do have information. They don't have magic hands, but they do have information. And great intervention is made more efficient when you've got lots of human capital. So I'll speak to you as school leaders, because we always think about the human capital in our organization. Human capital is that broad set of skills and knowledge that are necessary. When we're looking at the human capital in our school organizations, we are looking at the skills that our teachers possess, that paraprofessionals possess. We're looking at their skills, and we're looking not only at their knowledge, their formal knowledge, but also their interpersonal skills, such as the ability to collaborate, such as the ability to be able to work in teams. And human capital, it comes down to this: that's the sum of the professional skills of the members of an organization. Investing in the human capital of your staff to be able to develop those professional skills and to not keep them siloed. Special educators need to know about general education. General educators need to know about special education. And a way of doing so, and a way of thinking about this, is to use role release. I'm going to share in the chat that you also have in the mailings that you received earlier, our job descriptions that we have at the school where Doug and Dominique and I work as well. These are the actual job descriptions. As we interview anybody who works at our school, We make sure that an important part of that is an understanding that we are an inclusive school. These are not just roles that we discuss whenever we're interviewing a special educator, but anytime that we're interviewing an educator, a paraprofessional, as well as a special educator, and we talk along these constructs and these expectations. One is around instruction, that in each of those roles, there are instructional responsibilities that happen. They vary somewhat depending on your specific role. Each of them have responsibilities around assessment and also around communication, especially in things like attending planning meetings. How are you talking and communicating with families and so on? To extend that further, and I don't have this on the screen, but each of those roles also requires record keeping. There's record keeping that's involved for the general educator, the special educator, and the paraprofessional. And then there are roles and responsibilities around leadership. For the paraprofessional, that leadership includes things like facilitating those social relationships between students, modeling effective communication for other staff members. For the special educator, what the special educator oversees in terms of leadership is training and supervising paraprofessionals. So how are those paraprofessionals scheduled and utilized and so on? And leadership for the general educator, especially in being able, again, to co-supervise paraprofessionals as well as peer tutors. The general educator is responsible for the peer tutoring that happens. Oh, there's the other screen for that. So I'm going to turn this back over to the chat again for all of you. Where are there some other possibilities to restructure adult collaborations? What are some things that you have done or things that you're considering? And just to kind of spark that up a bit, how are your PLCs constructed? How are your grade level teams constructed? What are some other possibilities for restructuring around adult collaboration? And Becky, that, you know, I'm so glad to hear you say that as well. Common planning time for classroom teachers needs to include the special educator. At the school where we work now, we're at a high school, our common planning time is on a different day of the week, depending on the grade level, but the special educator is involved in that. And CPT time. So I'm not familiar with that term. Could you just expand that a little bit when you talk about CPT? Oh, common planning time. Got it. Got it. Thank you. Amy, I love the suggestion even about just shifting the language around that to instructional specialists rather than special education teachers. We similarly do not refer to specific teachers as being special educators, but rather student support. And we just refer to them that way. They're student support specialists. Let's take on a third of those disruptions in particular, and that's in being able to systematize access to the core curriculum. And one of the ways that we accomplish this is by using an infused skills grid. There was a time when the curriculum, especially for students with more significant disabilities, really looked like this. This was their curriculum, right? It was those IEP skills. That was what their curriculum looked like. Really hard to be able to say, we're going to grant access to general education curriculum when all we actually end up talking about are what are the goals and objectives that are on their IEP. We use in all of our IEPs, we use an infused skills grid. And again, you received a copy of this earlier. I'm also putting it back into the chat one more time for easy reference as well. So during each of our IEP meetings, what we discuss are the what the schedule looks like. So this is what our schedule looks like: math, science, history, English, internship. We are a health sciences school, so we have a very robust internship program as well. So that's kind of what our daily schedule looks like. And then we list down on the side, what are those IEP goals that that particular student needs. This is something that is led by the special educator, and it is generally drafted in advance of the meeting, especially by talking with the family, talking with peers or with the student, doing all of those things that we usually do to be able to gather what possible draft IEP goals there might be. And then we do a crosswalk. This is an ecological survey, right? And we do a crosswalk. Where can those goals best be met within the schedule in particular? So in other words, really infusing that core curriculum with those IEP specific goals. This is really useful for being able to support students with more significant disabilities. This is Jeffrey. Jeffrey in high school at the time, and he had as part of his goals some activities of daily living. He does not need to go away to a special class to be able to do things like learning about cleaning and washing and those sorts of things. Lots of opportunities to do so in the chemistry class that he was taking at that time. Lots of opportunities to be able to do some of those things that would be infused in there. Another student that I supported, Lucy, another student with a significant disability. And in this particular case, one of her activities of daily living was tying shoes, right? This was a younger child learning how to tie your shoes. Well, guess what? There are lots of different places where you can get a chance to be able to tie your shoes. Like, oh, I don't know, PE is a place where you can get a chance to be able to tie your shoes. You don't have to have a special shoe tying time. Another student as well, very little volitional movement, but one of her IEP objectives was in being able to utilize switches with gaze control in particular. Well, we don't need to have a half an hour of switch toys, for example, but rather let's think creatively about where there are places where she can turn things on and off. One of the places that that we utilized one year was in her PE class, aerobics specifically, and her job was to turn the music on and off as well, which actually reinforced cause and effect really nicely for her. The question really isn't where is it possible, but rather, where is it not possible? There are some very specialized goals that do require a student's removal from the general education classroom. But we want to always take that approach first and foremost, that we're looking first at and doing an environmental scan of where it is that that might be possible to be able to do. I have to tell you that Perry Zirkle, who is a special education lawyer and law professor at Lehigh University, over the years has just made hay with being able to request IEP records and to look for in IEP meetings where there's a record that the general education environment was considered. An infused skills grid makes it really clear that the place that you came from first and foremost was the general education classroom, and that decisions about any kind of pulling out are evidenced because the general education classroom did not allow for opportunities to be able to make gains on goals and objectives. So again, I'll turn this over to the chat. What advantages might you see in terms of using an infused skills grid at your school? And while you're answering, I'll share another story. Supporting an elementary school in, I used to work in Florida, and so this was down in the Keys. And one of the things that the elementary school did was by grade level, they collaborated with one another and they determined what the schedule would be in each of their grade levels, kindergarten versus first grade versus second grade. They created that for the special education department to be able to use in IEPs so that they could talk about where it was that those particular goals could be worked on. And Sarah, I love the idea. You're right too, about really being able to develop that teacher buy-in to an inclusive model. And as Brian noted, helping again to be able to move the conversation from your kids and my kids, right? Mary, I think your point is a really important one too, especially as you get to the secondary level and teachers maybe only have experiences with a student for 90 minutes a day, for example. I'm not sure how long your classroom periods are. And so it gives them that broader span to be able to do. By the way, when we, for each general education teacher who has a student with a disability on his or her roster, we include a student profile as well as the infused skills grid so that they can see where it is that their students are working on particular IEP goals and objectives. A fourth disruption is making sure that we're systematizing that collaborative instruction and intervention as well. Those curriculum supports are so important to be able to accomplish with our students. And very often, you know, the lingo, if you will, is accommodations and modifications. Sometimes they get utilized incorrectly as being interchangeable. Accommodations are changes to the how. Right? An accommodation provides a student with access to information. It does not change the instructional level or content or performance criteria for that student. And I'm going to put back into the chat again a third one of those resources that I shared with you, types of accommodations that are available for students. We want to have that common vocabulary so that as we come together in IEP teams, that it doesn't become a mystery for parents, for fellow teachers, and so on, to be able to talk about what those accommodations are. Those accommodations might be around size or time. Time, by the way, is the single most common accommodation that is noted on student IEPs. It may be about input or output. In other words, how that student is going to demonstrate their mastery around output, or how it is that they're going to receive that information around input. And then sometimes there are notes in there around levels of support, noting especially that levels of support include peer supports as well as paraprofessional and special educator supports. Modifications are more significant in that they change the what. Modifications are sometimes utilized for students with more significant disabilities, and it's actually a change in what it is that the student is expected to learn or to demonstrate. That student might be working on a modified course content, however, the subject remains the same. In the case of Jeffrey, who I noted earlier, he had lots of experiences around that chemistry class, but he was in a modified course content. He wasn't there to master all of the standards that are related to chemistry in particular. And ways that we talk about modifications are especially same, only less. Sometimes it's streamlining the curriculum. The assignment is reduced in its breadth or its focus to emphasize what those key points are, or it's the same activity, but there's an infused objective. I'll go back to the infused skills grid as an example of that. Practicing tying your shoes in PE would be an example of that. Here's an example of streamlining the curriculum. This was a student at my school, actually just a couple of months ago. In his biology class, he had a streamlining of the curriculum. He had modified course content. Doesn't mean that he's not responsible for learning some of the key topics. They were learning about photosynthesis. Here's one page from the exam that he took. Now, it's important to note this as well, that the modifications and accommodations are only as good as the curriculum that's derived from. If the curriculum itself is boring or meaningless, or the instruction is ineffective, then modifications and accommodations are not going to be able to save what those experiences are. As it applies to developing the skills of students, especially skills of students without disabilities, we want to make sure that we're really achieving those values that we talked about as well. In that same chemistry class that I spoke of that Jeffrey attended, during another year, there was a student who couldn't sit on those chairs. I don't know what it is about that, chemistry, you've got to be 3 feet off of the ground in order to master it, but that's what the stools look like in there. And because of some physical limitations, she was not able to do so. And the chemistry teacher turned this over to students and said, this is a problem that we all have. Let's do random acts of chemical kindness and what might be the solution. 2 of the boys turned this community solution in, and they came back with this. Now, I'm not sure that their parents were excited about being able to do that, but I love the idea that the community, in particular, that classroom community, can ensure that students are getting those opportunities to be able to do so. And let's talk about that last disruption in particular. And that is in making sure that we have high expectations for our students. The goal always is that we're having all educators being able to support all students in particular, that we want to be able to do so. An equity audit can be a great way to be able to identify what those potential institutional barriers are that get in the way for students. I'm going to drop that into the chat as well. This is part of a larger equity audit that we've written about in Building Equity. This is the portion of the equity audit that pertains especially to how it is that we're supporting students with disabilities in particular. Having that equity audit and being able to look closely at what might be hiding in plain sight can be a way to be able to move that forward. At the end of the day, the fact is this: all students belong to all of us. We want to make sure that we have lots of means for being able to do so. It starts with developing that culture of equity, inclusion, and honoring the spirit of least restrictive environment, not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. Ensuring that there are opportunities for collaborative instruction that happen among adults, that we're pursuing what it is that our students aspire to, and ensuring that all educators support all of our students. So my question to you is, what will you do next as we come into this next school year and the opportunities to reconceive and reimagine what it is that school looks like? That's my challenge to you as well. I'm going to turn this back over to our hosts to be able to conclude our time together. But I hope that this reinforced things that you're already doing and perhaps sparked up some new ideas of things that you want to carry forward into the fall of this year.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nancy. You have given us so much to think about and so much to take back to the people that we work with and collaborate with in our schools. And as always, your work, a hallmark of your work and the work that you've done with others, is that it's really grounded in real practice. This is grounded in your real school that you live and work in, like we live and work in our schools. You really, every time you share your work, it's really clear to us that you really don't just talk the talk. You really are the real deal, and you know what the obstacles are as well as the opportunities. And we are very, very grateful that you shared this good learning with us today and this good thinking with us today. This is the kind of thing that I know I would want more of, and I would be interested in how I could get the book, which is chock full of the kinds of resources that you shared with everyone and that you worked with a little bit in our time together today. So I think, Eric, I think there's a slide up, or can you give us information again and maybe dump in the chat what people can do if they would like to get the book with tons of the kinds of resources that Nancy shared today?
Yes, thank you, Karen. The easiest way is to email me at the email address that you see on the screen, and I've put it into the chat. It's nysascd.director@gmail.com. All three of the books in this series are available at really what is a pretty good discount compared to the retail price. So if you're interested in receiving these books, just email me and I'll explain how to go about doing that. And hopefully we can get them to you pretty quickly. We have them available right now.
That's great. Thank you so much, Eric. I'd also like to call everyone's attention. Nancy, we love your background today, as well as having you on it. Your background is saying leading the rebound, and that is work that includes Dominique Smith, who is going to be the keynote at our annual conference, which we are hoping to hold in October of this year, October 17th and 18th. Leading the Rebound is going to be the theme of Dominique's keynote address. The theme of our entire conference is Building Back Better. And once again, all of you are being forced to build differently every single year, the way things are right now. So we hope that you go to our SAANYS website, www.saanys.org, and look for information about that upcoming conference and continuing updates about that conference. I would just like to share one more really good opportunity with everyone before we sign off for the day. On your screen, you're going to see information about the 2021-2022 SAANYS cohort. emphasis on the word cohort, on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are so happy that we have our good friend and colleague, Dr. Lavelle Brown. He is the superintendent in Ithaca, and he, through, I would say, over the past 10 years, has been a real colleague for us at SAANYS, as well as one of really the leading voices around diversity, equity, inclusion learning for educators around the state, not just for the last year, 2 or 3, but really for a long while. And we continue to find that our members and others want us to give them more opportunities to work with Lavelle, to work with Dr. Brown. So we have developed what we're very, very excited about. It's really the first time ever. We're forming a cohort. You can be part of the cohort that begins in October. Dr. Brown will facilitate 9 sessions through June. He will bring on guests, and this will be the place for you to collaborate with other educators. We are certainly encouraging you in your schools to bring teams, to register teams in your schools for this. And you might want to look into whether the current new kinds of funding that you are receiving, this is something that could qualify for that. We're seeing a lot of teams signing up, but it's also going to be a chance for you to connect with other educators all around New York State. This is going to be a challenging year, any way you slice it, not only around COVID concerns, but around continuing the important and complex work around increasing equity in our schools, in your schools. You have a place to come once a month for an hour plus and really share where things are at in your school and community, what you need help with, and really have a really active cohort with the kind of leadership that we know you will really appreciate. So this is going to be a great opportunity. It's far beyond a workshop. And also, you know, don't worry if you can't make a couple of the sessions, you'll get recorded versions of them. So please, by all means, check out the DEI cohort starting in October, continuing through June, and check out the good things that are coming with our conference in October. And once again, we just couldn't be happier, Nancy, to have you with us today. And Eric, thank you so much for your partnership. Thank you, Bonnie, for sharing a little bit about our mentoring program. Also, abundant information on our website. And thank you so much, Annika, for making this all happen and go so smoothly. And with that, we're going to wish everyone a beautiful day. It's pretty beautiful in parts around New York State. And we were joking before. I'm going to tell you what the joke was. We saw a lot of you were signing in early. And we said they think if they sign in early, they're going to get out earlier, but that didn't work, did it? But now, hopefully you can go to the pool, the beach, or your backyard and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. And thank you, everyone. And keep coming back to SAANYS for your PD. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone. Take care. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Nancy.